what if everything you thought you knew about Princess Diana was a beautiful lie? We all know the fairy tale, the shy young woman plucked from aristocracy, transformed into a global icon, a princess who captured the world's heart. But beneath the glamour and the heartbreak, beneath the familiar name Spencer, lies a story far older and far darker than anyone ever told you. It's a story soaked in blood, betrayal, and forbidden love. A story that begins not with Diana herself, but 5 centuries earlier in the shadowy halls of Tudor England, a time of kings and queens, of beheadings and broken vows, of power struggles that shaped the fate of nations. Because Diana wasn't just a people's princess. She was the living heir to a legacy that rulers once tried to erase from history. A legacy born when a rebellious princess defied the might of King Henry VIII, when a forbidden marriage set off a chain of tragedy and revenge that echoed across generations. That bloodline was hunted, silenced, and stripped of power. It should have vanished forever, and yet, against all odds, it survived, hiding in plain sight, until one quiet young woman brought it roaring back into the heart of the British monarchy. This isn't the story you read in textbooks, this is the real story, of a cursed bloodline, a centuries-old rebellion, and how the crown's greatest enemy returned to claim the throne. And it all begins with the woman the world thought they knew.
For decades, we've been told a comforting story. It's the one printed on glossy magazine covers, replayed in royal documentaries, and whispered in fairy tale tones that Princess Diana was a young woman from a respectable aristocratic family, a kind-hearted nursery assistant who fell in love with a prince and became the people's princess. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if beneath the polished surface of the Spencer name, beneath the castles, the titles, and the centuries of privilege, lies a story that's far older, far darker, and far more dangerous than anyone has dared to admit? This is not the story of Diana the celebrity or Diana the fashion icon. It's the story of Diana the heir, not just to a family fortune, but to a bloodline soaked in betrayal, rebellion, and vengeance. A bloodline that once defied the most powerful monarch in the world, was hunted nearly to extinction, and yet refused to die. It's a story that begins not in the 20th century, but 500 years earlier, in a kingdom drenched in intrigue and paranoia. And at its heart is a young woman whose choices changed the course of royal history forever. England, 1514. The Tudor dynasty stands at the peak of its power. King Henry VIII, ambitious, charismatic, and feared, rules with an iron fist. His word is law, his will unchallengeable. And in a court full of schemers and soldiers, one person holds a special place in his heart. His younger sister, Mary Tudor. Mary is everything a Renaissance princess is meant to be. Strikingly beautiful, graceful, and fiercely intelligent. Her fiery red gold hair and sharp wit make her a darling of the European courts. Henry calls her his pearl, the jewel of his family, but pearls, as Mary is about to learn, are not meant to be free. They are meant to be worn, displayed, and used. At just 18 years old, Mary's life is decided for her. Henry, eager to cement an alliance with France, orders her to marry King Louis XII, a man nearly 3 times her age, frail, and in failing health. To Henry, the marriage is a chess move on the grand board of European politics. To Mary, it is a sentence. She arrives at the French court surrounded by suspicion and resentment. The courtiers whisper behind silk-gloved hands. The icy halls feel more like a gilded prison than a palace. And yet, amidst the coldness and calculation, Mary's laughter, as one guard later recalled, is the only warmth in that entire castle. 82 days later, Louis is dead, and Mary Tudor is a widow. But more importantly, she is free, at least for a moment. Freedom for a princess in the 16th century is an illusion. Widows are pawns, bargaining chips to be traded in the marriage markets of Europe. And Mary knows her brother will not leave her unwed for long. But Mary has a secret, a promise made in the shadows long before she ever set foot in France. Before her departure, she had fallen deeply in love with Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk. Charles was Henry's closest friend and a rising star at court. Charming, capable, and loyal. But he was no prince. Their love, though sincere, was forbidden. Still, they swore that if fate ever made Mary a widow, she would choose her next husband, and she would choose him. Now, with Louis dead, Mary intends to keep that promise, and she knows that doing so could cost them both their lives. When Henry learns of Louis's death, he acts quickly. He dispatches Charles Brandon to France with a simple order: bring my sister home. But there's a darker, unspoken command beneath the king's words: do not touch her. Henry knows of their affection. He trusts Charles enough to send him, but not enough to believe he won't be tempted. As a warning, he presses into Charles's hand a heavy golden signet ring, a symbol of faith and loyalty. Do not betray me, the message is clear. Imagine Charles on that ship across the English Channel, the salt spray on his face and the weight of that ring like a burning coal in his pocket. He is trapped between two loyalties: to the king who made him and the woman who is his only chance at happiness. When he arrives in France, he finds Mary shrouded in mourning, but when their eyes meet, grief dissolves into desperation. That night, Mary confronts him with a demand: marry me, now. Charles hesitates. He warns her of the tower, the executioner's axe, the fate of traitors. But Mary is resolute. If he refuses, she says, she will tell Henry he broke her heart. Either way, the king's wrath will fall, so better to face it together. And so, in a small chapel outside Paris, with only a trembling priest and a handful of frightened servants as witnesses, Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon defy a king. As Charles slips a borrowed ring onto her finger, a gust of wind blows the chapel doors open, extinguishing the candles. The priest gasps. A bad omen. They are married, and they are doomed. The journey back to England is a nightmare. Every creak of the ship's timbers sounds like the scrape of an executioner's blade. Every wave feels like the king's rage crashing down upon them. They write desperate letters to Henry, pleading for mercy, offering Mary's dowry, her jewels, anything. When they land at Dover, the welcome is colder than the sea. No banners, no music, only a handful of officials. One refuses to call Mary Your Grace. Another looks at Charles with pity. The message is unmistakable. They are no longer royal favorites. They are traitors. Their journey to London is a death march. Crowds gather not to cheer, but to whisper. A stable boy even slips them a drawing of the Tower of London. Two figures standing on a scaffold. Everyone expects them to die. Instead, they are thrown into isolation. Mary is placed in luxurious chambers, locked from the outside. Charles is kept in a bare stone room with a single barred window. This is Henry's first move, not the axe, but fear. Weeks pass in silence. Finally, Charles is summoned to face the king. He expects a public trial, a royal court. Instead, he is led into a private study. There sits Henry VIII, cleaning his fingernails with a dagger. He doesn't shout, he doesn't rage. He simply lets the silence crush Charles like a vice. Then, almost gently, Henry speaks. You know the law, he says. To marry the king's sister without his consent, that is treason. And the punishment for treason is death. The room goes cold. But then Henry smiles, a predator's smile. Your head is worth less to me on a spike than your life is in my debt. Henry spares their lives, but the price is brutal. First, they must repay every penny of Mary's dowry. Then they must surrender the income from their estates. They are nobles in name only, paupers in reality. Second, humiliation. They must remarry publicly before the entire court, kneeling to beg for Henry's forgiveness. Their love will not be remembered as defiance, but as submission. And the final punishment is the cruelest of all. Your children, Henry declares, will live because I allow it. They will carry no titles. They will be watched. They will never be free. Charles leaves the room broken. He came fearing death. He leaves condemned to a life of servitude. Mary and Charles go on to have children. 2 daughters who survive to adulthood, Frances and Eleanor. Outwardly, their life seems enviable. Fine clothes, grand feasts, a great household. But it is all an illusion. Every decision, every guest, every conversation is monitored. Their steward is a royal spy. Their home is a prison with flowers in the windows. Their children grow up in this strange duality, privileged yet haunted. They are granddaughters of a king, but forbidden to speak of it. Their blood is not a blessing, it is a curse. Frances, the eldest, inherits her mother's fiery spirit, But like her parents, she is denied freedom. Her marriage is arranged by the crown, a calculated move to control the dangerous Tudor blood running through her veins. She weds Henry Grey, a respectable match, but not one of love. From this union, 3 daughters are born: Jane, Catherine, and Mary Grey, 3 women whose lives will carry the weight of this cursed bloodline. The story of Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon might have ended there, a forgotten chapter in a history book. But their defiance set in motion a chain of events that would echo for generations. Jane Grey, their granddaughter, would become England's 9 days queen, a brilliant young woman manipulated into a throne she never sought. She would lose her crown and her life before her 18th birthday. Her sisters, Catherine and Mary, would suffer their own tragedies: forbidden marriages, illegitimate children, years of imprisonment. The crown's message was clear: this bloodline would never be allowed to rise again. And for centuries, it seemed as though that message had succeeded. The descendants of Mary Tudor faded into the background of English society. They became minor gentry, priests, and farmers. The fiery Tudor blood thinned, forgotten, buried beneath layers of history. But bloodlines have a way of surviving. They slip through cracks, hide in plain sight, and wait for the right moment to return. And return it did, in the most unexpected way imaginable. Epilogue: the bloodline sleeps. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the descendants of Mary Tudor were no longer considered royal. Their names appeared in parish records, not royal genealogies. They married into country families, not noble houses. Among those families was one whose name would one day become famous: Spencer. Generations later, a quiet young woman named Diana Frances Spencer would capture the world's attention. She would marry the heir to the British throne, and through her, the bloodline that Henry VIII once tried to destroy would return, not as a threat lurking in the shadows, but as a future king in waiting. But that part of the story, the revenge of history, the return of the bloodline, belongs to another chapter. For now, remember this: before Diana was ever a princess, before she ever walked down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral, her destiny was written in a French chapel 5 centuries ago, when a young woman named Mary Tudor chose love over a king. The story of Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon could have ended with their humiliation. Stripped of wealth, controlled by the crown, their children watched like criminals. But their defiance planted a seed that even Henry VIII's wrath could not uproot. Their daughter, Frances Brandon, grew up in a world defined by contradictions. She was granddaughter to a king, yet forbidden from claiming royal blood. Her mother had once defied the most powerful man in England, but Frances was raised to obey. When she came of age, she was not free to choose her own husband. Henry ensured that her marriage would serve the crown's interest, not her heart. She was married off to Henry Grey, Marquis of Dorset, a politically convenient match, but far from a love story. From that union came 3 daughters, Jane, Catherine, and Mary Grey, each destined to inherit not just their mother's noble blood, but also the curse that came with it. And through them, the Tudor legacy would once again collide with England's throne and its executioner. The eldest, Lady Jane Grey, was a prodigy. Brilliant, bookish, and deeply religious, she spoke several languages and spent hours immersed in her studies. She never sought power. In fact, she despised the politics of court. But her blood made her a pawn in a game far larger than herself. When Henry VIII died, his only son, Edward VI, inherited the throne. But Edward was sickly and childless, and his Protestant advisors feared what would happen if his half-sister Mary Tudor, a devout Catholic, took power. Their solution was desperate: bypass Mary and install a Protestant heir with Tudor blood. Jane, the great-granddaughter of Henry VII through Mary Tudor, fit the plan perfectly. She was royal enough to be legitimate, Protestant enough to be safe, and young enough to be controlled. In July 1553, Jane was informed she would become queen. She wept, she begged, she protested that she had no desire to rule, but no one listened. Power-hungry nobles, including her father-in-law, the Duke of Northumberland, forced her into the role. On July 10, 1553, Jane was proclaimed Queen of England. It was the beginning of her reign, and the countdown to her death. Jane's reign lasted just over a week. Across the country, the people rallied not for her but for Mary Tudor, the rightful heir by Henry VIII's will. Mary's claim was undeniable and her support overwhelming. On July 19th, Mary entered London triumphantly, cheered by thousands. Jane's rule was over before it had truly begun. She was arrested, along with her husband and father. At just 16 years old, the girl who wanted nothing more than to read her books and live a quiet life now awaited execution in the Tower of London. In February 1554, Jane was led to the scaffold. Hours earlier, she had watched her young husband executed beneath her window. When it was her turn, she climbed the steps with dignity and courage. Blindfolded, she reached out for the execution block and could not find it. "What shall I do? Where is it?" she asked, panic in her voice. A guard gently guided her hands. Moments later, the axe fell. Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen, was dead. Her blood stained the scaffold, but her death did not end the curse. It only deepened it. The crown's vengeance did not stop with Jane. Her sister, Catherine Grey, inherited both the family's claim and its peril. Catherine was everything Jane was not. Lively, sociable, and strikingly beautiful. But she had learned a bitter lesson from her sister's fate. She knew that being a Tudor descendant was a death sentence if handled recklessly. Under Queen Elizabeth I, the danger was even greater. Elizabeth refused to marry or name an heir, and as the senior descendant of Henry VII's younger daughter, Catherine was a potential successor, and thus a potential threat. Catherine tried to live quietly, but love once again disrupted the plan. She fell deeply in love with Edward Seymour, a nobleman with his own royal blood. They married in secret, hoping to avoid the Queen's wrath. But when Catherine became pregnant, the truth could no longer be hidden. Elizabeth's reaction was swift and merciless. She declared the marriage invalid, Catherine's children were declared illegitimate, and then she separated the lovers forever. Catherine was imprisoned in a series of castles, moved from one cold stone chamber to another. She was never allowed to see her husband again. Years passed in isolation. Catherine's health failed, and at just 27 years old she died, officially of illness, but in truth of heartbreak. Another branch of the Tudor bloodline was cut down, not by the axe, but by loneliness. The youngest sister, Mary Grey, was born with dwarfism and a curved spine. Court society mocked her, dismissed her as harmless. She posed no threat, or so they thought. But Mary, too, inherited the Tudor spirit of defiance, and like her sisters before her, she chose love over power. Her choice was Thomas Keyes, the Queen's sergeant porter, essentially the royal doorman, a man far below her station. Their marriage, though loving, was an outrage in the eyes of the court. Elizabeth's punishment was swift. Mary was placed under house arrest, separated from her husband for years. She died in obscurity, another casualty of the bloodline that refused to obey. With the deaths of Jane, Catherine, and Mary, it seemed the Tudor bloodline born from Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon had finally been extinguished. Catherine's surviving children were declared illegitimate. They were stripped of their proximity to the throne. Over generations, their descendants became minor landowners, clergymen, and merchants. They were no longer royal contenders. The crown's message had been delivered loud and clear. This bloodline would never threaten the throne again. And for centuries, it seemed to work. The Tudors fell, the Stuarts rose and fell, the Hanoverians took the throne. Dynasties came and went, but the descendants of Mary Tudor vanished into the folds of English society. Yet bloodlines are stubborn things. Even when forgotten, they endure. And this one, the bloodline Henry VIII had tried so hard to erase, would one day find its way back into the halls of power, not with an army, but with a wedding dress. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the once dangerous descendants of Mary Tudor had become respectable but unremarkable. They married into wealthy merchant families and country gentry. They built estates and tended lands. Among these families were the Spencers, prosperous sheep farmers who rose through the ranks of English society. Over generations, they amassed wealth, titles, and influence. By the 19th century, they were part of the British aristocracy, known for their stability and discretion. What no one realized, or perhaps no one cared to remember, was that deep within their family tree, hidden like a forgotten inscription on an ancient tomb, flowed the blood of Mary Tudor, Charles Brandon, Jane Grey, and Catherine Grey. It was still there, waiting. Fast forward to the 20th century. The Spencer family, now one of Britain's most respected noble houses, welcomed a daughter, Diana Frances Spencer. To the public, Diana's story seemed like a modern fairy tale. A shy, gentle young woman from a well-to-do family fell in love with the heir to the British throne. On a summer day in 1981, she walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral and became Princess of Wales. The world saw a commoner marrying into royalty, a symbol of hope and renewal for the monarchy. But this narrative, like so many before it, missed the deeper truth. Diana was no outsider. She was the embodiment of a centuries-old story, the living descendant of Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon, of Jane Grey and Catherine Grey. The bloodline that kings had tried to annihilate was walking once more through the palace gates. Even her middle name, Frances, carried the memory of Frances Brandon, Mary Tudor's daughter. It was a quiet but powerful reminder that history was not finished with this family. Through Diana, the Tudor bloodline returned to the very heart of the British monarchy. Her son, Prince William, now heir to the throne, carries within him the same blood that Henry VIII once declared unfit for power. The same blood that saw a 17-year-old queen executed. The same blood that condemned Catherine Grey to die of heartbreak. The same blood that forced Mary Grey into obscurity. And now, that blood will one day sit upon the throne of England. It is history's most poetic irony, the ultimate act of revenge. Henry VIII tried to erase Mary Tudor's legacy. He failed. The monarchy that once sought to destroy this bloodline now depends on it for its future. Perhaps this is why Princess Diana resonated so deeply with people around the world. It wasn't just her compassion, her humanity, or her defiance of royal protocol. It was something older, something written into her very blood. She carried within her a story that stretched across centuries. A story of love and rebellion, of power and punishment, of tragedy and survival. She was more than a princess. She was a living chapter of a saga that kings and queens had tried to bury. And when people looked at her kindness, her vulnerability, her courage to challenge the crown, they were perhaps unknowingly looking at the ghost of Mary Tudor, the fire of Jane Grey, the heartbreak of Catherine, and the quiet resilience of Mary Grey. History is not a straight line. It is a circle. What is buried often rises again. What is silenced often finds a voice. More than 5 centuries ago, a young woman in a chapel in France defied the most powerful king in the world to marry the man she loved. She paid a heavy price for that choice, and so did her children and their children after them. For generations, the crown tried to erase them. It stripped them of power, humiliated them, imprisoned them, and pushed them into obscurity. But blood has a long memory. It endures, it waits, and eventually it returns. Princess Diana was not just a modern icon. She was the living embodiment of that endurance, a symbol of a bloodline's refusal to disappear. And now, through her son, that bloodline will once again rule England. So the next time you see Prince William, the future king, remember that he is more than a Windsor. He is a Tudor. He is a Grey. He is the heir not just to a throne, but to a story written in defiance, forged in blood, and carried forward by love. By the time Diana Frances Spencer was born in 1961, centuries had passed since the executioner's blade fell on Lady Jane Grey. The Tudors were long gone, the British monarchy transformed, and the tragedies of Mary Tudor's descendants seemed like distant echoes in a forgotten history book. But blood remembers, even when history forgets. From the outside, Diana's childhood was the life of a typical British aristocrat's daughter. The Spencers were wealthy, well-connected, and respected, one of England's most prominent noble families. They had served kings and queens for centuries. Their ancestors had fought in wars, governed counties, and even hosted monarchs at their estates. But Diana's upbringing was far from idyllic. Her parents' bitter divorce left deep scars, and as a child she often described herself as insecure and unworthy. In many ways, she was shaped by contradiction, just like the bloodline she came from. She was born into privilege, yet constantly felt powerless. She was surrounded by grandeur, yet longed for genuine love. And deep inside, whether she knew it or not, she carried the legacy of women who had defied kings, challenged empires, and suffered for choosing their hearts over their crowns. When Prince Charles, heir to the British throne, proposed to Diana in 1981, the press framed it as the ultimate fairy tale. A shy kindergarten teacher marrying a future king. Cameras captured every smile, every wave, every nervous glance. The world fell in love with the idea of them. The perfect royal couple who would modernize the monarchy and breathe new life into a centuries-old institution. But behind the fairy tale facade, cracks were already forming. Diana was only 19, barely out of her teens, while Charles was 32 and still deeply entangled with his former lover, Camilla Parker Bowles. Their engagement felt less like a romance and more like a strategic arrangement, a union meant to serve the monarchy, not necessarily the individuals within it. On the day she walked down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral, watched by 750 million people worldwide, Diana looked every bit the fairy tale princess. But privately, she was terrified. "I felt like a lamb to the slaughter," she would later admit. It was a phrase eerily reminiscent of Jane Grey's walk to the scaffold, the sense of being swept up in forces beyond one's control. Life inside the royal family was nothing like Diana had imagined. The institution that appeared glamorous from the outside was, in reality, rigid, cold, and isolating. She quickly discovered that love mattered less than duty, individuality less than tradition. She was scrutinized for everything: her clothes, her weight, her gestures, even her choice of words. The press hounded her relentlessly. Courtiers criticized her for being too emotional and too modern. Most painfully, Charles remained emotionally distant, still devoted to Camilla. The fairy tale crumbled. Diana struggled with depression and an eating disorder. She felt trapped in a gilded cage, much like Mary Tudor in her locked chamber or Catherine Grey in her prison cell. The parallels were striking: women with royal blood, bound by invisible chains, punished for not fitting the mold. But Diana was not like those who came before her. Where Jane Grey submitted to fate, Diana began to resist it. By the mid-1980s, Diana had undergone a transformation. She was no longer the timid teenager who had entered the palace. She had become a global figure, charismatic, empathetic, and fiercely independent. She used her platform not just for ceremonial duties, but to challenge the monarchy's very perception of itself. She shook hands with AIDS patients when others recoiled. She hugged landmine victims and held sick children close. She spoke openly about her struggles with mental health, a taboo subject in royal circles. For the first time in modern history, a member of the British royal family was openly human, and people loved her for it. Diana wasn't just a princess. She was a symbol of compassion, vulnerability, and courage. Her authenticity transcended the monarchy. But her rising popularity terrified the institution. Within the palace, whispers grew louder. Diana was overshadowing Charles. Her humanity was being perceived as a threat to royal mystique, much like how the Tudor bloodline itself had once been seen as a threat to the throne. The cracks in Diana and Charles's marriage eventually became chasms. Affairs, jealousy, and bitterness poisoned their relationship. The press, hungry for scandal, exposed private phone calls and tabloid rumors. In 1992, their separation was announced. 4 years later, the divorce was finalized. Diana was stripped of her royal title and much of her formal role. Many expected her to fade into obscurity, just another footnote in royal history. But instead, she became more powerful than ever. Free from the constraints of the palace, Diana continued her humanitarian work with renewed purpose. She spoke openly about the monarchy's failings, about her struggles, about her desire to raise her sons, William and Harry, as grounded, empathetic men. And she did something far more profound. She redefined what royalty meant. It was no longer about bloodlines, palaces, or protocol. It was about service, empathy, and humanity. Through Diana, the bloodline that Henry VIII once tried to erase had found its voice again, and this time it spoke directly to the people. Consider the irony. Mary Tudor had defied a king to marry for love. Jane Grey had been manipulated into a throne she never wanted. Catherine Grey had been imprisoned for following her heart. Mary Grey had been punished for marrying below her station. And now Diana, their descendant, was defying the world's most famous monarchy by daring to live on her own terms. Her struggle was their struggle, reborn in a modern age. Her defiance was their defiance, sharpened by centuries of injustice. And her impact, far greater than any of them could have imagined, was a victory they were never allowed to see. On August 31st, 1997, tragedy struck again. Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris, chased by paparazzi. The world stood still. Millions wept openly. Tens of thousands lined the streets to mourn her funeral procession. Her death felt cruelly familiar, another chapter of a cursed bloodline ending in sorrow. It echoed Jane Grey's execution, Catherine's lonely death, Mary's obscurity, but there was a difference this time. Diana did not die in silence. She died loved, deeply, universally, fiercely. She died having changed the monarchy and the world, and she left behind two sons who would carry forward not just her memory, but her blood. Prince William, Diana's eldest son, is now the heir to the British throne. One day he will be king, and when that happens, the bloodline that Henry VIII sought to destroy will finally sit on the throne once again. Think about the weight of that history. Henry VIII tried to erase Mary Tudor's descendants from power. Elizabeth I imprisoned them, stripped them of legitimacy, and erased their titles. The monarchy spent centuries pushing them into obscurity. And yet, through Diana, through William, through the quiet resilience of generations who refused to disappear, that bloodline endured. When William places the crown upon his head, it will not just be a coronation, it will be a 500-year reckoning, the ultimate act of historical irony. The throne that once condemned Mary Tudor's family will now depend on them for its future. It's tempting to view Diana's story as a standalone tragedy, a fairy tale gone wrong, a modern woman crushed by an ancient institution. But when you look deeper, you see that her story is part of something much bigger. It's the story of a bloodline that refused to die. It's the story of love defying power again and again. It's the story of women who were silenced, erased, and punished, and who still, somehow, found a way to shape history. Diana was not the beginning or the end of that story. She was its crescendo, the moment when centuries of pain, defiance, and resilience converged into one unforgettable life. And through her children, especially through the future King William, that story is still being written. Epilogue, the circle complete. History has a way of circling back on itself. What begins in rebellion often ends in triumph. What is buried is often reborn. 5 centuries ago, a young woman named Mary Tudor risked everything to marry the man she loved. Her children and grandchildren paid dearly for that choice. They were executed, imprisoned, humiliated, and forgotten. But blood never forgets. It survived the scaffold and the dungeon. It survived illegitimacy and obscurity. It survived centuries of erasure. And in the end, it returned, carried quietly in the veins of a woman named Diana Spencer. Diana's story is not just about a princess. It's about history's longest revenge. It's about a bloodline that kings tried to crush and queens tried to silence, and how in the end it outlasted them all. The next time you see Prince William standing where Henry VIII once stood, remember, he is not just a Windsor. He is a Tudor. He is a Grey. He is the living proof that power fades, crowns change hands, but blood endures. And in that endurance lies the final poetic justice of history.
When Princess Diana died in 1997, the world grieved. It felt as though an era had ended, and in some ways, it had. But history was not finished with Diana. Her legacy did not vanish with the crash in that Paris tunnel. It lived on in her 2 sons, Prince William and Prince Harry. They were still just boys, aged 15 and 12, when they walked behind their mother's coffin, their faces etched with grief that the world could not forget. But those 2 boys were not only heirs to their mother's memory, they were heirs to the centuries-old story she embodied. Through them, the bloodline of Mary Tudor continued to flow. The same blood once condemned to silence and obscurity now beat in the hearts of the next generation of royals. And it would change everything. William and Harry were raised under the watchful eye of the monarchy, but they were also shaped by Diana's influence, her compassion, her humanity, and her defiance of royal expectations. She taught them that being royal was not about titles or ceremony, but about service, empathy, and connection. And that philosophy would go on to redefine the very essence of the British monarchy. Prince William Arthur Philip Lewis is not just the heir to the British throne. He is the living embodiment of 5 centuries of royal evolution and rebellion. Through his father, he inherits the House of Windsor, the lineage of George VI and Elizabeth II, the continuity of the modern British crown. But through his mother, he carries something far older, far more complex, the blood of the Tudors, the legacy of Mary Tudor, Jane Grey, and all those who defied the monarchy's power. And that dual inheritance has shaped him profoundly. Unlike many of his royal predecessors, William understands that monarchy in the 21st century must adapt or die. He has embraced a more human, accessible approach to royalty, a style deeply influenced by Diana. He speaks openly about mental health. He appears in public as a father and husband first, a prince second. He has positioned himself not as a distant figurehead, but as a servant of the people, a modern monarch for a changing world. In a sense, William represents the perfect fusion of 2 dynastic forces, the institutional stability of the Windsors and the rebellious humanity of the Tudors. And when he ascends the throne, it will be more than just a royal succession, it will be the symbolic return of a bloodline once erased from history. If William embodies the fusion of tradition and change, Prince Harry embodies the spirit of rebellion that has defined his maternal bloodline for centuries. From the moment he stepped into public life, Harry was known as the spare, the one born without the burden of the crown. And yet, it was this very freedom that allowed him to challenge the monarchy in ways no royal had done before. His decision to step back from royal duties in 2020, alongside his wife, Meghan Markle, sent shockwaves through the institution. Critics called it betrayal. Supporters called it evolution. But in truth, it was something far older. It was the echo of Mary Tudor refusing to marry for power, of Catherine Grey risking everything for love, of Diana walking away from a life that suffocated her. Harry's story is not just a modern scandal, it's the continuation of a centuries-long pattern. The Tudor blood has always rebelled against control. It has always resisted being caged. And Harry, knowingly or not, has carried that tradition forward. Diana's most enduring legacy is the transformation of the monarchy's relationship with the public. Before her, the royal family often stood apart, distant, untouchable, a symbol rather than a presence. After her, the expectations changed. The people no longer wanted a monarchy that ruled from afar. They wanted a monarchy that felt. This shift was not just a matter of personality, it was a structural change. It redefined what legitimacy meant in the modern era. Historically, royal legitimacy was derived from blood, lineage, and divine right. But Diana, and the Tudor legacy she carried, introduced a new dimension, emotional legitimacy. A monarchy that does not empathize, that does not connect, risks losing its purpose. And this change is now irreversible. William and Harry, in their own ways, both embody this new model of monarchy. William does so from within, modernizing the institution from the throne. Harry does so from outside, challenging it to evolve. Together, they ensure that Diana's influence, and by extension, the Tudor spirit, continues to shape the crown. If we step back and view this story not as a series of disconnected events, but as a single, continuous narrative, something remarkable becomes clear. 500 years ago, King Henry VIII tried to erase a bloodline. He humiliated his sister Mary for choosing love over duty. He punished Charles Brandon for defying him. He stripped their descendants of power, imprisoned them, executed them, and declared their children illegitimate. And yet, generation after generation, that bloodline endured. It endured when Jane Grey was crowned and executed. It endured when Catherine Grey was imprisoned and her children disinherited. It endured when Mary Grey was mocked and forgotten. It endured when their descendants became farmers, clergy, and merchants. And now, that same bloodline, once considered too dangerous to exist, is the foundation of the British monarchy's future. That is not just irony. That is history's longest revenge. In the centuries-long saga of the Tudor legacy, Diana represents the culmination, the ultimate expression, of its central themes: love defying power, humanity challenging hierarchy, and individuality triumphing over control. Her life was a tragedy, yes. But it was also a triumph. She forced the monarchy to evolve. She brought compassion into an institution defined by rigidity. She turned personal vulnerability into global influence. And she did something no Tudor descendant before her could: she changed the course of history without losing her head. When her son William becomes king, it will not merely be a coronation. It will be a vindication. It will mean that the blood once condemned by Henry VIII has not only survived but prevailed, not by conquest, not by rebellion, but by outlasting the very forces that tried to destroy it. Blood is more than biology. It is memory. It is history. It is destiny. The story of Mary Tudor and her descendants is not just a royal family saga, it is a parable about resilience. It shows how ideas, values, and legacies can survive across centuries, even when kings and queens do everything in their power to erase them. And it shows how history is not written by the victors alone. Sometimes, it is written by those who endure. Diana endured. Her bloodline endured. And because of that endurance, the British monarchy of the future will look very different from the monarchy of the past. It will be more human, more compassionate, more connected, and in many ways, more Tudor than ever before. In the end, history is a circle. What began in a chapel in France over 5 centuries ago, with a young woman choosing love over power, will end in Westminster Abbey, when a king crowned by that same bloodline takes the throne. The story that started with defiance will end with destiny. And when Prince William stands before the altar, the crown placed upon his head, he will not stand there as merely a Windsor. He will stand there as the heir to Mary Tudor's courage, Jane Grey's sacrifice, Catherine Grey's love, and Diana Spencer's humanity. He will be the living embodiment of history's most poetic irony, that the blood once deemed unfit to rule is now the blood that secures the future of the British crown. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson of all: power fades, empires fall, and dynasties crumble. But blood remembers. It remembers the chapel where Mary Tudor risked everything for love. It remembers the scaffold where Jane Grey's life was cut short. It remembers the lonely prisons where Catherine and Mary Grey suffered. It remembers the palace halls where Diana wept and the streets where millions mourned her. And it remembers the promise, unspoken but eternal, that one day, the blood would return. That day is coming. And when it does, the throne of England will belong not just to the Windsors, but to the Tudors. Not just to the crown, but to the blood. Not just to the past, but to the story that refused to die. By now, one thing has become clear: the Tudor bloodline is more than a genetic inheritance. It is a cultural force, a narrative that has shaped, and continues to shape, the British monarchy's identity. For centuries, monarchy was defined by hierarchy, divine right, and unshakable tradition. It was something that existed above the people, untouchable, unchallengeable. But the Tudor story has always been different. It is the story of humans within royalty, people with desires, fears, passions, and flaws. Mary Tudor's defiance was not about politics, it was about love. Jane Grey's tragedy was not about ambition, it was about being a pawn in a power game. Catherine and Mary Grey's stories were not about rebellion, they were about wanting to live and love freely. And Diana, more than anyone, brought that humanity into the modern age. She was not a distant figure on a throne. She was a mother, a friend, a compassionate advocate. She was a woman who cried, who laughed, who broke down, and who got back up. This is the true legacy of the Tudor blood. It is not just who sits on the throne, but how they rule. It demands that monarchy evolve from a symbol of distance into a mirror of humanity. The British monarchy is now at one of the most critical junctures in its 1,000-year history. Once unquestioned, its authority is increasingly scrutinized. Calls for republicanism grow louder in some corners of the Commonwealth. Younger generations question the relevance of a hereditary institution in a modern democracy. And yet, paradoxically, the monarchy remains deeply woven into the fabric of British identity. It serves as a unifying symbol, a bridge between history and the present. It represents continuity in a rapidly changing world. The key to its survival and its evolution lies in embracing the lessons of the Tudor bloodline. That means recognizing that the crown must not only command respect but also earn love. It must not only symbolize power but also embody purpose. Diana understood this instinctively. So does William. And this understanding will likely determine whether the British monarchy thrives in the 21st century or becomes a relic of the past. As William prepares for his future role as king, the weight of expectation upon him is immense. He will not only inherit a throne, he will inherit a centuries-old struggle between tradition and transformation. Yet William has already shown signs that he intends to lead differently. He has embraced causes his ancestors might have dismissed: mental health advocacy, homelessness, climate change. He has spoken candidly about grief, about vulnerability, about the pressures of royal life. This is no accident. It is the Tudor legacy at work. The kings and queens of the past ruled with absolute authority. But the king of the future will rule through connection. In many ways, William's reign will mark the culmination of the transformation that began with Mary Tudor's defiance and reached its emotional peak with Diana's compassion. The monarchy of tomorrow will not be measured by pomp or power, but by purpose. Prince Harry's decision to step away from royal duties was not the end of his influence, it was the beginning of a new chapter. Freed from institutional constraints, he and Meghan Markle have leveraged their global platform to champion causes like mental health, racial equality, and veterans' welfare. Critics often accuse Harry of abandoning his heritage. But in truth, he is honoring it. He is living out the Tudor tradition of choosing personal integrity over institutional expectation, a tradition that began 5 centuries ago with Mary Tudor herself. And in doing so, he has extended the reach of that legacy beyond Britain's shores. The Tudor bloodline now resonates not just in palaces but in public discourse, not just in royal ceremonies but in global conversations about justice, empathy, and humanity. The story of the British monarchy has never been confined to Britain. From the days of the Tudor Empire to the height of Victorian colonialism, the crown has been a global force. And even now, in a world where empires have faded and monarchies have lost their political power, it remains a global symbol. The marriage of Diana's sons and the future reign of William will not just shape Britain, they will shape perceptions of monarchy around the world. A kinder, more human monarchy could inspire other royal families to evolve or expose those that refuse to change. And at the center of this global transformation is a bloodline that was once hunted to extinction. It is almost poetic, isn't it? Henry VIII sought to erase Mary Tudor's descendants because they threatened his vision of monarchy, a monarchy built on absolute authority and obedience. And now, half a millennium later, those same descendants are leading the monarchy in precisely the opposite direction, toward empathy, service, and humanity. What Henry saw as weakness, love, vulnerability, defiance, has become the monarchy's greatest strength. What he tried to silence has become its voice. What he feared would destroy the crown may, in fact, be what saves it. When Prince William becomes king, the headlines will likely focus on continuity, the seamless transition from Elizabeth II's reign to his. But the deeper story will be far more profound. It will be the story of a bloodline once branded as illegitimate now wearing the crown. It will be the story of a family once stripped of power now defining it. It will be the story of a monarchy once resistant to change now shaped by it. The coronation will not just be a ceremony, it will be the conclusion of a 500-year narrative arc. And the throne will not just belong to the Windsors, it will belong to the Tudors too. Long after the flowers from her funeral have faded and the tabloid headlines have been forgotten, Diana's presence continues to shape the world. Her sons embody her values. Her humanitarian work inspires new generations. Her life story, a blend of fairy tale and tragedy, continues to captivate millions. But perhaps her most enduring legacy is invisible. It flows quietly through the veins of the future king. It binds him to a lineage that defied power and reshaped history. It connects him to a story far larger than his own. Diana once said she wanted to be the queen of people's hearts. In a way, she achieved that, and more. Through her children, through her blood, through the monarchy she helped transform, she has become something greater, a queen of history's heart. The story we have traced, from Mary Tudor's forbidden marriage to William's future coronation, is not a closed circle. It is a spiral, continuing outward into the future. It will shape how William raises his own children. It will influence how the monarchy responds to global challenges. It will echo in the hearts of future generations who look back and see not just kings and queens, but people who loved, lost, defied, and endured. Because that is the true power of legacy. It is not confined to the past. It lives, it breathes, and it shapes what is yet to come. So here we stand, at the end of one story and the beginning of another. The blood that Henry VIII sought to erase has endured every attempt to silence it. It has survived beheadings, imprisonments, betrayals, and centuries of obscurity. It has passed quietly through generations, through noble halls and humble farms, through forgotten names and famous ones. And now, that blood, defiant, resilient, unbreakable, stands ready to wear the crown once more. When that moment comes, it will not just be a coronation. It will be the ultimate act of poetic justice. It will be the fulfillment of a promise made in a small chapel 5 centuries ago, when a young woman chose love over power. The blood that kings feared. The blood that queens tried to suppress. The blood that history tried to forget. It will rule. The British monarchy has always been about more than a crown. It is a living symbol, a story told across centuries, a mirror reflecting the nation's past, present, and future. And yet, no symbol is eternal. Power changes. Societies evolve. Crowns rise and fall. But blood endures. The story of Mary Tudor's descendants is proof of that enduring power. It reminds us that dynasties are not defined solely by palaces or titles, but by choices. By the human decisions that echo across generations, a forbidden marriage, a defiant yes whispered in a chapel, a refusal to bend before a king's will. Every great transformation in this story, from Mary Tudor's rebellion to Jane Grey's sacrifice, from Catherine's heartbreak to Diana's courage, was born not of armies or laws, but of deeply human acts of love, fear, defiance, and hope. And it is those acts, more than anything, that have shaped the monarchy's soul. History often remembers kings and queens in broad strokes, the wars they fought, the empires they built, the crowns they wore. But the heart of history lives in its stories, not its statistics. Mary Tudor is remembered not just as a king's sister, but as a woman who risked everything for love. Jane Grey is not remembered as a failed queen, but as a girl who died with dignity rather than betray her beliefs. Catherine Grey's tragedy still moves us because it speaks to a universal truth, the longing for freedom. And Diana remains one of the most beloved figures in modern history because she embodied compassion in a world that often lacked it. These are more than historical figures, they are myths in the truest sense, stories that continue to shape how we see ourselves. They remind us that power is fragile, that courage matters, and that love, even in the face of tyranny, can ripple across centuries. To understand Britain is to understand its monarchy. And to understand the monarchy is to understand its contradictions, tradition and change, power and service, hierarchy and humanity. The Tudor bloodline represents those contradictions perfectly. It began as a challenge to the established order, a story of rebellion and forbidden love. It became a symbol of tragedy, persecution, and loss. And finally, it evolved into a force for renewal, reshaping the monarchy from within, softening its edges, grounding its power in empathy rather than authority. This evolution mirrors Britain's own journey, from absolute monarchy to constitutional democracy, from empire to global partner, from isolated island nation to interconnected world power. The bloodline's transformation is not just a family story, it is the story of a nation growing, changing, and redefining itself. In the coming decades, the British monarchy will face questions more difficult than any before. Should it still exist? What purpose does it serve in a modern democracy? How can it justify its privileges in a world that demands equality and transparency? The answer may lie in the very legacy we've explored. The monarchy will survive and remain relevant only if it continues to embrace the humanity embodied by the Tudor bloodline. It must be more than ceremony and tradition. It must be a platform for compassion, a beacon of continuity that reflects the people it represents. William understands this. His reign will likely see a smaller, more focused royal family, one that prioritizes service over spectacle. He will emphasize mental health, climate action, and social responsibility. And as he does, the spirit of Mary Tudor, Jane Grey, and Diana will live on, not as ghosts of the past, but as guiding lights for the future. The influence of this story does not stop at Britain's shores. Across the world, monarchies face similar questions. In Sweden, Spain, Japan, and beyond, royal families are grappling with the need to modernize and humanize. In this context, the British example, shaped profoundly by the Tudor legacy, could set the standard. A monarchy that leads not by commanding, but by connecting. A crown that reigns not from above, but from alongside. A royal family that reflects not divine right, but shared humanity. This model has the potential to redefine monarchy in the 21st century, not as an outdated relic, but as a living institution capable of evolving with the world it serves. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing about this story is how its symbols have transcended time. The chapel, where Mary Tudor defied her brother's will for love, a symbol of individual choice over royal decree. The scaffold, where Jane Grey faced death with courage, a symbol of dignity and conviction in the face of injustice. The prison, where Catherine and Mary Grey suffered, a symbol of resilience amid oppression. The streets of London, where millions mourned Diana, a symbol of the power of empathy over hierarchy. And soon, Westminster Abbey, where William will be crowned, will become the ultimate symbol, a testament to the fact that history does not erase what is inconvenient. It transforms it. It elevates it. It writes it into destiny. 500 years ago, Henry VIII sought to shape history through brute force. He broke with the church. He built a new state religion. He dissolved monasteries and rewrote laws. He reshaped England's political landscape with sheer will. But all of it, every crown, every law, every royal decree, was ultimately temporary. His empire faded. His line ended. His vision changed. What remained? Not the policies. Not the palaces. What remained was the blood, the choices of a sister who defied him, and the legacy those choices created. That blood flowed through centuries of obscurity and tragedy. It endured beyond dynasties and empires. And in the end, it returned, not as a challenger, but as the lifeblood of the crown itself. This is the paradox of power: it cannot kill what is written in blood. As we look ahead to the future, the story of the Tudor bloodline is far from over. It will continue in William's reign. It will continue in the lives of his children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. And it will continue in the ways the monarchy adapts, evolves, and responds to the challenges of a changing world. Perhaps George will be the first British monarch to reign in a fully post-imperial commonwealth. Perhaps Charlotte will redefine the role of women in the royal family. Perhaps Louis will pursue a life outside the monarchy altogether. Whatever paths they choose, they will carry with them the same blood that once defied a king, a reminder that even the mightiest throne rests on the choices of ordinary humans. And so we return to the beginning, to a windswept chapel in France, where a young woman made a choice that would change the world. She did not set out to shape history. She only sought love. But from that simple, human act came a chain of events that spanned centuries, toppled dynasties, and redefined the very nature of power. This is the story of the Tudor bloodline, a story of rebellion and resilience, of love and loss, of tragedy and triumph. It is the story of how power tried to silence humanity, and failed. Today, that blood stands on the cusp of history once more. Soon, it will wear the crown. Soon, it will guide a nation. And when that day comes, the ghosts of Mary Tudor, Jane Grey, Catherine Grey, and Diana will not haunt the throne. They will sit upon it. History never truly ends. It doesn't stop at a coronation or an execution. It doesn't pause when a dynasty rises or falls. It flows, sometimes slow and steady, sometimes in sudden waves, reshaping the present with every ripple from the past. The story of the Tudor bloodline is no exception. It is not confined to dusty archives or family trees carved into old oak tables. It is alive, pulsing quietly beneath the surface of the modern world, influencing decisions, shaping institutions, and reminding us that power is always personal. Every generation believes itself to be the end of the story, the final chapter. But when William places the crown on his head, it will not be the end. It will be the beginning of a new era, one built upon the sacrifices, rebellions, and acts of love that came before. From the Tudor saga, we inherit more than blood. We inherit lessons, warnings, even about the nature of power and the fragility of legacy. Power without restraint leads to tyranny, as Henry VIII's reign proved. Ambition without compassion leads to tragedy, as Jane Grey's fate reminds us. Authority without humanity crumbles, as centuries of rebellion, revolution, and reform have shown. But we also learn something else, that love, often dismissed as weakness, is the strongest force in history. It has overthrown empires, reshaped dynasties, and carried bloodlines through centuries. It was love that drove Mary Tudor to defy her brother. It was love that cost Catherine her freedom. It was love that made Diana reach out beyond palace walls to touch the lives of millions. And it is love, love for family, for country, for people, that will define the monarchy's future. The world that William and his children will inherit is vastly different from the one his ancestors knew. Globalization, technology, social media, and shifting cultural values are reshaping every institution, including the monarchy. The crown will no longer be a distant symbol of divine authority. It must become a living institution, relevant, responsive, and relatable. Future monarchs will not reign simply by birthright but by public consent. They will be expected to embody values like equality, transparency, and justice. This evolution does not weaken the monarchy, it strengthens it. It aligns the crown not with the privileges of the past but with the aspirations of the present. It transforms monarchy from a relic into a resource, a force that can unify, inspire, and lead in a rapidly changing world. There's a certain poetry in imagining the spirits of those who came before, Mary Tudor, Jane Grey, Catherine Grey, Diana, standing unseen beside the throne, whispering lessons into the ears of future kings and queens. Their stories are not just tales of the past, they are guiding principles. Mary's defiance teaches courage. Jane's dignity teaches integrity. Catherine's suffering teaches resilience. Diana's compassion teaches empathy. And together, they remind those who follow that the crown is not an ornament to be worn but a responsibility to be earned. Perhaps the most profound transformation of all is how the monarchy's legacy now lives beyond the royal family. It exists in the collective memory and imagination of the people and how they see themselves, their history, and their future. Princess Diana's story belongs not just to her sons but to the millions who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles. Jane Grey's courage belongs not just to history books but to every young person who dares to stand for their beliefs. Mary Tudor's defiance belongs not just to genealogies but to anyone who chooses love over fear. The Tudor bloodline, then, is no longer just a royal inheritance. It is a human inheritance. It belongs to all who are moved by it, shaped by it, inspired by it. The story also transcends Britain itself. Across the world, societies wrestle with the tension between tradition and progress, heritage and change. Monarchies are just one expression of this struggle, but the lessons of the Tudor bloodline apply far beyond them. Nations, too, must evolve. Institutions must adapt. Power must learn humility. And just as bloodlines endure, so too do ideals, passed from one generation to the next, reshaped and reinterpreted with each new age. The British Crown may be a uniquely British institution, but the story of defiance, love, and resilience that shaped it is universal. It is the story of humanity itself. If we trace the threads of history long enough, they always converge in surprising ways. Who could have predicted, 5 centuries ago, that a young princess's secret marriage would echo into the 21st century? That a bloodline once deemed unworthy would become the very heart of the monarchy? That a girl executed at 17 would inspire millions long after her death? History is not linear. It is cyclical, weaving past, present, and future into a single tapestry. And in that tapestry, the Tudor bloodline is not a single thread but a crimson current running through it all, connecting every chapter, every triumph, every heartbreak. We often think of history as something finished, a series of events that happened long ago. But history is not written in stone. It is written every day, by the choices we make, the values we uphold, the stories we tell. The Tudor legacy will continue to evolve, shaped by William's reign, by George's adulthood, by Charlotte's influence, by Louis's path, and by how the people themselves choose to engage with it. Every generation will reinterpret it, retell it, and rediscover new meanings within it. And in doing so, they will keep the story alive, not as a relic, but as a living, breathing narrative. In the end, this is what the story of the Tudor bloodline teaches us, that blood is more than lineage. It is memory. It is meaning. It is the thread that binds past to present and present to future. It cannot be erased by executions. It cannot be silenced by prisons. It cannot be extinguished by time. It lives on, in the veins of princes and in the hearts of ordinary people. It endures, in stories whispered by historians and in the dreams of those who still believe that love can change the world. And one day, long after we are gone, someone will stand before a throne, or a parliament, or a podium, and they will carry within them the same blood, the same spirit, the same story. And history will begin again. The crown is not metal. It is not jewels. It is not a throne. The crown is memory, a memory forged in love and loss, rebellion and redemption. It is the memory of a girl who refused to be a pawn, of a queen who walked to her death with grace, of a woman who hugged age's patience when the world turned its back. It is the memory of a bloodline that refused to die. And so long as that memory lives, in palaces, in books, in stories, in hearts, the Tudor legacy will never end. It will guide. It will inspire. And it will remind us that even in the halls of power, humanity is the most enduring crown of all. If this were only a story about kings and queens, about wars and crowns, it would have faded long ago. History is full of monarchs, hundreds of them, who conquered, ruled, and were forgotten. Yet the tale of the Tudor bloodline endures. It captures imaginations, inspires documentaries, fills bookshelves, and fuels conversations even 5 centuries later. Why? Because this is not just a story about power. It's a story about people. It's about a young woman who risked everything for love in a time when love could cost you your life. It's about a teenage girl forced into a crown she never wanted and who faced death with courage beyond her years. It's about sisters who loved too deeply, mothers who suffered too quietly, and a princess who gave her heart to the world. It's about humanity in all its beauty and brutality. Every civilization has its myths, stories that transcend facts and speak to something deeper. The Greek tragedies taught us about fate. The Epic of Gilgamesh taught us about mortality. The Arthurian legends taught us about justice and leadership. The Tudor saga has become one of Britain's great myths, not because every detail is heroic or noble, but because it embodies timeless human conflicts, love versus duty, freedom versus power, humanity versus authority. Mary Tudor's rebellion against her brother is not so different from Antigone defying Creon. Jane Grey's death mirrors Iphigenia's sacrifice. Diana's compassion recalls Demeter's grief, a mother's love that reshapes the world. These are not just historical figures. They are archetypes. And that is why their story will never truly end. It is retold not because it happened, but because it matters. The monarchy, at its core, is a mirror. It reflects the society that surrounds it, its values, its fears, its contradictions. In the 16th century, the crown symbolized divine authority, unquestionable, absolute, ordained by God. But today, it symbolizes continuity, service, and unity. And as the world changes, so too must the monarchy's reflection. The Tudor bloodline's journey, from rebellion to persecution, from obscurity to restoration, is also the monarchy's journey. It shows us that institutions evolve not through force, but through people. Through their struggles, their sacrifices, their choices. And in this mirror, we also see ourselves. We see our longing to break free from expectations. We see our fight to define our own destinies. We see our belief that love, even forbidden love, is worth everything. Among all the figures in this story, none embodies its mythic resonance more than Diana. She entered the royal stage as a shy young woman, seemingly destined to play the part of a fairy tale princess. But her story was no fairy tale. It was a tragedy, one that exposed the fractures within the monarchy and revealed its humanity to the world. Her compassion broke taboos. Her vulnerability broke traditions. Her death broke hearts. But in breaking those things, she also built something new, a monarchy forced to evolve, a public newly aware of its power, and a legacy that redefined what royalty could mean. Diana is more than a historical figure. She is a myth, the people's princess, the heart of a nation, the embodiment of love triumphing over formality. And like all myths, her story continues to grow and change with each retelling. There is a reason we are drawn to stories of bloodlines. Blood is history. Blood is memory. Blood is continuity. But blood is also a metaphor for connection, for inheritance, for shared humanity. The Tudor bloodline is not just a genealogical fact. It is a symbol of how our past shapes us, how our ancestors' choices ripple through time, how we carry within us the echoes of those who came before. William does not just carry Tudor blood. He carries Mary's defiance, Jane's courage, Catherine's resilience, and Diana's empathy. And in a way, so do we all. Every generation is shaped by the stories of those before it, their victories and their mistakes, their dreams and their regrets. There is also a quiet justice in how this story ends, or rather, how it continues. Henry VIII tried to erase Mary Tudor's descendants from history. He stripped them of titles, wealth, and power. He reduced them to obscurity. He tried to bury them so deep that they would never threaten his vision of monarchy. And yet, 5 centuries later, they will wear the crown. This is history's most poetic justice, that what one generation tries to erase, another restores. That the oppressed become the inheritors. That the silenced become the storytellers. That blood, once condemned, becomes destiny. In 1,000 years, the details of this story may fade. Names may blur. Dates may be forgotten. But the essence of the story will remain. It will live in every act of defiance born of love. It will live in every choice to follow the heart over the crown. It will live in every story where humanity triumphs over power. And as long as humanity itself endures, so too will the story of the Tudor bloodline. If you strip away the titles, the crowns, the castles, what remains is something profoundly human. A sister who loved. A daughter who defied. A girl who died with courage. A woman who cared. A son who will one day rule. This is the story of us, our fears, our hopes, our sacrifices, our legacies. It is a story that begins in a dusty French chapel with 2 people choosing love over obedience, and it ends, not with a coronation, but with a reminder, we are all the sum of the choices made by those who came before us. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful truth of all. History is not a list of dates. It is not a collection of names. It is a heartbeat, ancient yet alive, pulsing beneath the skin of the present. The Tudor bloodline is that heartbeat. It reminds us that the past is never truly past, that love can change the course of empires, and that even the mightiest crowns are powerless against the choices of the human heart. And so, 5 centuries after a forbidden marriage defied a king, the bloodline lives on, not just in the veins of princes, but in the stories we tell, the lessons we learn, and the future we create.